Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad and these are the headlines. In Pakistan, security forces have killed a terrorist and arrested another in an intelligence-based operation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a statement, the military's media wing said 2 civilians were also martyred due to the firing by the terrorists. It said both the militants belonged to the TTP and were involved in attacks on security forces and target killings. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says it is unfortunate that India has rebuffed Islamabad's efforts for peace. Addressing the inaugural ceremony of Pakistan's first ever Islamabad Security Dialogue, Imran Khan said if India gives the Kashmiris their rights, then the whole region will change, benefiting both the countries. The Prime Minister also launched an advisory portal for the National Security Division, which will engage think tanks and academia in policymaking. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has urged the UN to convene global dialogue on the promotion of interfaith harmony and discouraging Islamophobia. He was virtually addressing an OIC event in commemoration of International Day to Combat Islamophobia. The minister said far-right and neo-fascist parties are propagating policies inciting violence against Muslims and defaming Islam. President Joe Biden says Russian President Vladimir Putin will soon face consequences for trying to swing the last year U.S. election to Donald Trump. His comments come after a U.S. intelligence report accused Putin of meddling in the election. Moscow has denied the allegations as baseless. Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, has turned into a battle zone as security forces clashed with anti-coup protesters to enforce martial law. More than 200 protesters reported to have been killed in crackdown since February the 1st. The European Union is expected to approve sanctions against the country's military rulers next week. Pakistan has received the second batch of 500,000 COVID-19 vaccines from China. Pakistan has registered over 2,300 new cases and 61 deaths overnight as its toll tops 13,600. Meanwhile, Brazil's number of daily COVID-19 fatalities has hit another new high with 2,841 people dead overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.6 million lives and infected more than 120 million people. And in cricket, Afghanistan restricts Zimbabwe to 150 to win the first T20 international by 48 runs in Abu Dhabi. Rahmanullah Gobaz scored a blistering knock of 87 runs for Afghanistan. They are now leading the 3-match series 1-0. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Pakistan, security forces have killed a terrorist and arrested another in an intelligence-based operation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a statement, the military's media wing said 2 civilians were also martyred due to firing by the terrorists. It said both the militants belonged to the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They were involved in attacks on security forces and incidents of target killings. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says it is unfortunate that India has rebuffed Islamabad's efforts for peace. He was addressing the inaugural ceremony of Pakistan's first ever Islamabad Security Dialogue. Khan said if India gives the Kashmiris their UN-mandated rights, then the region will change, benefiting both the countries. He said Pakistan has always tried to resolve the Kashmir issue through dialogue. The Premier said good relations with neighbours in the region are paramount for national security. He lauded Islamabad's role in the Afghan peace process and said Pakistan has the second biggest stake in the country's peace. The Premier also pointed to the issue of climate change and said it is also in the paradigm of national security. The Prime Minister also launched an advisory portal for the National Security Division. It will engage think tanks and academia in policy making. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has urged the UN to convene global dialogue on the promotion of interfaith harmony and discouraging Islamophobia. He was virtually addressing an OIC event in commemoration of International Day to Combat Islamophobia. The minister said far-right and neo-fascist parties are propagating policies inciting violence against Muslims and defaming Islam. He said Pakistan opposes all acts of violence on the basis of religion or belief. Meanwhile, the UN General Assembly has adopted a Pakistan-led resolution on the promotion of inter-religious dialogue. According to the Foreign Office, the resolution was part of Islamabad's efforts to promote interfaith harmony. In Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the occupying troops continue their so-called cordon and search operations for the fifth straight day as Kashmiris fear for their lives. The Indian forces conducted house-to-house search operations in multiple districts, including Srinagar, Shopian and Pulwama. They continued their practice of pulling residents out of their homes, parading and harassing them in the streets. This comes after Indian troops mounted two Kashmiri youths during these inhumane military operations. An Afghan delegation led by High Peace Council Chairman Abdullah has left for Moscow to attend a conference on Afghan peace. The one-day meeting will be held on Thursday and the Taliban representatives will also join the conference. Before his departure, Abdullah said the Moscow conference will boost the ongoing Doha peace talks and the upcoming Istanbul conference. Qatar has also confirmed its participation in the summit, while Washington has designated its special envoy Zalmay Khalilzad to attend the meeting. Both Kabul and Washington have said the Moscow conference does not replace the intra-Afghan negotiations in Doha. But despite all efforts, violence continues to rage in the war-torn country, with the Afghan government claiming to have killed 34 Taliban fighters in Kandahar. Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, has turned into a battle zone as security forces clashed with anti-coup protesters to enforce martial law. Yangon's industrial suburb is one of the flashpoint sites in a nationwide uprising against last month's coup. On Sunday, the military imposed martial law there and other areas of the city, effectively placing nearly 2 million people under its control. Meanwhile, a group of Buddhist monks has called on the military to end violence against the protesters. More than 200 people are reported to have been killed in the crackdown. The European Union is expected to approve sanctions against the country's military rulers next week. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Washington will defend South Korea against all threats. He said this during talks with his South Korean counterpart Chung Eui-yong in Seoul. In a statement, the State Department said the two officials agreed to address the North Korean nuclear issue on a priority basis. It said Blinken urged Seoul to work with the U.S. to protect democratic values in the region. The visit is Blinken's first overseas trip aimed at rebuilding U.S. alliances in Asia. The UN nuclear watchdog says Iran has started enriching uranium at its underground Natanz plant with a second type of advanced centrifuge. In a report, International Atomic Energy Agency said the nuclear watchdog said Iran seeks to enrich uranium up to 5% at the plant. Iran has recently accelerated its breaches of 2015 deal's restrictions on its nuclear activities to pressure Washington into lifting its sanctions. Tehran argues that its breaches are in accordance with the deal as other signatories failed to fulfill their end of the accord. President Joe Biden says Russian President Vladimir Putin will soon face consequences for trying to swing the last year U.S. election in favor of Donald Trump. His comments come after a U.S. intelligence report accused Putin of meddling in the election, an accusation Russia denies. But he said there are certain areas where the two countries can work together, such as renewing the arms control treaty START. Released on Tuesday, the intelligence report has also accused Iran of interfering in the election. A US media report said both the countries could face sanctions as soon as next week. Russia says the UK's decision to boost its nuclear arsenal will harm international stability. The Kremlin says Britain's plans to expand its nuclear capabilities have dealt a serious blow to disarmament. Moscow said it will take London's move into account when working on its military plans. This comes after Britain announced it will increase its nuclear warhead stockpile by more than 40%. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the increase takes into account technological threats and a risky global environment. At least 58 people have been killed in an attack on a convoy in the Tillaberi region of southwestern Niger. In a statement, a government spokesperson said militias carried out targeted executions of passengers. He said the terrorists also killed people and burned their huts in a nearby village of Darede. The government has declared a 3-day national mourning for the victims. No group has claimed the responsibility for the massacre yet. Nigerian authorities say nearly 40 students kidnapped last week from a college in northwest Kaduna State are safe. In an interview, the Kaduna governor ruled out negotiations or paying a ransom to the kidnappers for their release. He said Nigeria's armed forces are engaged in surveillance operations after the kidnappings. However, due to recurrent kidnappings, the government's efforts are at risk right now. In a separate incident on Monday, 3 teachers were abducted in Kaduna by the attackers who stormed a primary school. Since December 2020, gunmen have abducted nearly 1,000 Nigerian students in raids on schools and hostels. Syrian army says its air defenses have intercepted Israeli missiles on the outskirts of the capital Damascus. It said Israel launched the attack from the direction of the occupied Golan Heights to target the Syrian military assets. The army said the strikes only caused material damage. This comes as the world marks the 10th anniversary of the uprising in Syria that led to a devastating conflict. Israeli forces have wounded 11 Palestinians in a raid on a town in the northern outskirts of occupied East Jerusalem. In a statement, Palestine Red Crescent Society said the Israeli army stormed the town of Kafr Aqab. It said a military bulldozer barged in after demolishing the wall surrounding the town. The Red Crescent said the troops used rubber bullets and tear gas against the Palestinian youth. The US has called on the international community to designate Lebanon's Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. This comes shortly after a delegation from the group met with Russia's foreign minister in Moscow. The head of Hezbollah's parliamentary bloc led a 4-member delegation to meet with Sergei Lavrov. The US State Department condemned the visit and invite from Moscow. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said Hezbollah is designated as a foreign terrorist organization under the US law. In an interview, Price urged all the countries to reject the false distinction between the group's military and the political wings. A US-based civil rights watchdog says white supremacist propaganda reached alarming levels across the US in 2020. In a report, the Anti-Defamation League said over 5,000 cases of hateful messages were spread in 2020. It said the last year marked the highest level of white supremacist propaganda seen in at least a decade. According to the report, at least 13 known white supremacist groups were behind hate propaganda. But 3 groups, the New Jersey Heritage Association, Patriot Front and Nationalist Social Club, were responsible for 92% of the activity. The report comes as federal authorities investigate and prosecute those who stormed the US Capitol in January this year. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Brazil, the number of daily COVID-19 fatalities has hit another new high with 2,841 people dead overnight. England has reported 2 cases of a new variant, first reported in the Philippines. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.6 million lives and infected more than 120 million people. More in this report.
The new coronavirus variants challenging the effectiveness of vaccines and controversies over side effects of AstraZeneca have descended the world into turmoil. In the United States, Kentucky State is investigating the role of a new variant at a nursing home. Amid the suspension frenzy, the World Health Organization has donated the first Oxford vaccines to Nicaragua through its global COVAX facility. Mexico is also awaiting a response from the U.S. to request to share doses of Washington's stockpiled AstraZeneca vaccines. Meanwhile, half of the Brazilian states have implemented curfews and other restrictions to curb the unprecedented spike. However, the fourth health minister since the pandemic began pledged to continue the controversial policies of far-right President Bolsonaro.
The police belongs to the government of Bolsonaro. The police does not belong to the health ministry. The health ministry executes the government's policy only. I spoke with the team of Ministry of the Health so that we can reinforce the measures that are already being put into practice throughout Brazil and bring new contributions, always based on the best scientific evidence.
In Europe, chaos and confusion reign supreme after the suspension of the Oxford vaccine. Vaccination centers are closing their doors and appointments are being abruptly cancelled. France, too, is now investigating a new variant found in the western Brittany region that experts say is more difficult for tests to detect. Prime Minister Jean Castex says France's third wave is characterized by a lot of variants. Meanwhile, several international organizations continue to make a case for AstraZeneca amid one of the biggest glitches in the pandemic response.
It is a huge problem how to solve the dilemma of how much bad press AstraZeneca has had, but putting our heads in the sand isn't going to help. Either we have to talk about it and reassure people that AstraZeneca is a good vaccine, if that proves to be the case, which I think will be proven.
India's main opposition Congress party has accused the government of exporting nearly twice the number of vaccines than the immunization conducted at home. Meanwhile, Russia has claimed that its COVID-19 vaccines have proven effective against new variants in the trials.
Pakistan has received the second batch of 500,000 doses of the Sinofarm vaccine from China. A special plane arrived at Islamabad from China. The country has registered over 2,300 new cases and 61 deaths overnight. The health ministry says the countrywide death toll has topped 13,600. The countrywide caseload has crossed 612,000, of which more than 575,000 people have recovered. In Pakistan, Air Marshal Zahir Ahmad Babar has been appointed as the Chief of Pakistan Air Force. The outgoing Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Anwar Khan will hand over the command to Babar on Friday. The newly appointed chief joined the force in 1986 as a fighter pilot and is currently serving as the Deputy Chief of Air Staff Administration. An Indian Air Force pilot has been killed after his MiG-21 Bison fighter jet crashed in central India. In a tweet, the Indian Air Force said the aircraft crashed while taking off. The IAF added a court of inquiry has been ordered to determine the cause of the accident. India has long been criticized for its fleet of outdated MiG-21 Bison aircraft, which serves in only 18 air forces worldwide. According to IAF Chief B.S. Dhanoa, India was operating 44-year-old fighter jets when people didn't even drive cars. They were this old. Human Rights Watch has slammed Sri Lanka over a new deradicalization law introduced earlier this month. The law allows 2 years of detention without trial for causing religious, racial or communal disharmony. In a statement, the rights group described the law as another weapon to target dissidents and minorities. It urged the Sri Lankan government to immediately repeal the law. The new regulations came ahead of a UN resolution on the treatment of minorities in the island nation. Last week, Sri Lanka announced plans to ban the wearing of burqas and shut madrasas. Denouncing the decision, the OIC urged Sri Lanka to allow Muslims to practice their religion freely. A UN delegation is set to start a 3-day visit to a remote island where Bangladesh has moved over 13,000 Rohingya Muslim refugees. The UN refugee agencies said the team will assess the conditions there and hold discussions with the authorities. Bangladesh wants to transfer 100,000 of more than 1 million refugees living in border camps to Basanchar Island. The island emerged from the sea only 2 decades ago and is considered vulnerable to floods. Bangladesh has dismissed the safety concerns. Iran's civil aviation body has blamed an error by an air defense operator for accidental downing of Ukrainian passenger plane in 2020. In its final report, the civil aviation said the plane was identified as a hostile target due to a mistake. Iran's Revolutionary Guards shot down the plane last year in January, killing 176 people on board. Iran later said the shooting was a disastrous mistake by forces who were on high alert during a confrontation with the US. In the US state of Georgia, 8 people, including at least 6 Asian women, have been killed in shootings at 2 massage parlors in Atlanta. Police say they have arrested a 21-year-old Georgian man suspected of carrying out the attacks. A spokesperson for the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office said 4 people were killed at Young's Asian massage parlor. Later in Buckhead, police responding to a theft call arrived at a beauty spa and found 3 women shot dead. Authorities said they did not immediately know if the victims were targeted because of their race or ethnicity. The killings come amid a recent wave of attacks targeting Asian Americans in the US. Ethiopia has rejected Sudan's calls for non-African mediators in the dispute over the construction of a dam on the Nile River. An Ethiopian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said African Union is welcome to help, but Addis Ababa will oppose mediation by other parties. He said Ethiopia believes in resolving African problems by Africans. He added the trilateral talks among Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt should be concluded between the 3 countries. Earlier, Sudan requested the Arab Union, United Nations, European Union and the US on forming a quadripartite mechanism for mediation. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has unveiled plans to increase the UK's stockpile of nuclear weapons. Speaking in the Parliament on the government's release of Integrated Review of Foreign and Defence Policies for 2030, he said the country will shift its focus on Asia as part of a foreign policy overhaul. More in this report.
Following its exit from the European Union, Britain is exercising its options more independently, ranging from trade to countering risks. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the country is facing new technological threats and will compete against the states with opposing values. He said the UK will do more on the systemic challenge of China.
Britain will remain unswervingly committed to NATO and preserving peace and security in Europe. And from this secure basis, we will seek out friends and partners wherever they can be found, building a coalition for openness and innovation, and engaging more deeply in the Indo-Pacific.
Following Johnson's announcement, the overall cap on the country's number of nuclear warheads will now increase to 260 by the middle of the decade. The number was due to drop to 180 under the previous plans. Hinting to strengthen cybersecurity, Johnson said Britain will deploy more armed forces overseas.
The first outcome of the integrated review was the government's decision to invest an extra £24 billion in defence, allowing the wholesale modernisation of our armed forces and taking forward the renewal of our nuclear deterrent.
Experts and campaigners believe the British government's decision violates international law. Director of the Nuclear Information Project, Hans Christensen, describes the UK announcement as deeply disappointing. Moreover, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has also called the UK's move as utter hypocrisy, as Britain earlier showed concern over Tehran's nuclear ambitions.
A small South Korean island, which is left with only 4 children, symbolizes the country's demographic crisis. In 2020, the World Bank reported it to be the fastest aging society with the lowest birth rate across the globe. More in this report.
Liu Chen-hee, one of the last children on a remote island in South Korea, wishes to have more friends to play with. His two younger sisters and a friend are the only other children on the island Nokdo. The once vibrant small fishing village on the island is now on the verge of becoming depopulated. It is left with only 100 residents, most of which are elderly people.
Seoul is so crowded, noisy, and the air is not good. However, Nokdo has no traffic. Isn't it noisy and the air is clean? I can play outside more actively, so I like it here.
After South Korea's economic boom in the 1970s, as more and more women entered the workforce, family planning campaigns became very active, sharply declining the nation's birth rate.
It would be an empty island if the number continues to decrease. It saddens me. I want to protect Nokdo, but it's depressing to see fewer and fewer people here.
According to the World Bank, South Korea's fertility rate dropped to a mere 0.84 in 2020 from 4.5 in 1970. The Bank of Korea expects the nation will overtake Japan as the oldest society in the world before 2045.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Another business updates. The U.S. stocks have dropped as investors await the results of Federal Reserve's two-day policy meeting. The Nasdaq Composite lost over 1% as technology shares got hit by rising bond yields. The shares of Apple, Alphabet, Facebook and Netflix traded low. The indices of S&P 500 and DJI also landed in negative territories. Meanwhile, oil prices also declined for a fourth day on Europe demand concerns. In cricket, Afghanistan restricted Zimbabwe to 150 to win the first T20 international by 48 runs at the Sheikh Zayed Stadium in Abu Dhabi. Afghanistan put a mammoth target of 199 runs after they were asked to bat first. Rahmanullah Gurbaz scored a blistering knock of 87 runs, while Rashid Khan dismissed three Zimbabwean batsmen. Gurbaz was named man of the match. Afghanistan are now leading the three-match series 1-0. In football, Real Madrid have strolled into the quarterfinals of the Champions League, beating Atlanta 4-1 on aggregate. They comfortably beat Atlanta 3-1 at home in the second leg of the knockout stage to qualify for the final eight for the first time since 2018. Karim Benzema drove Real into the lead in the 34th minute, netting his sixth goal in 5 games. Skipper Sergio Ramos and substitute Marco Asensio further capitalized to seal the win for the 13 times European champions. Meanwhile, Manchester City marched into the quarter-final for the 4th straight season. Pep Guardiola's side defeated Borussia Mönchengladbach 2-0 in the second leg to complete their 4-0 aggregate win. A draw on Friday will determine the quarter-final contests. In tennis, world number 5 Stefanos Tsitsipas has eased into the second round of the Mexican Open in Acapulco. The Greek star beat French Benoit Paire 6-3 and 6-1 in just 69 minutes. Tsitsipas will now face the big-serving American John Isner on Thursday. In another contest, Italian qualifier Lorenzo Musetti defeated Argentina's Diogo Schwartzman in the first round. Musetti secured a 6-3, 2-6 and 6-4 win over 9th-ranked Schwartzman in a stunning success. Meanwhile, Miloš Raonic sent down 13 aces as he dominated American Tommy Paul 7-6 and 6-4. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.